All right, so what you can see here is there's a lot of pundits and industry analysts in the marketplace who will talk about the growth of retail media and the total dollar amount of retail media. What you can see here is this growth, almost $100 billion by 2028, is fueled really by two things. One is the need to get closer to the cash register and the data that allows you to do it. And so this growth, obviously, as you can see, from a change perspective, has slowed, but just the rapid, huge growth of what's happening with retail media, eventually it's got to slow, right? You're not going to continue to grow at 20, 30% year over year. And ultimately, what they say is by 2028, we'll see about 21% of all digital media will be retail media. So it's a big, hairy topic, and obviously there's a lot of interest and engagement with retail media. You can go to the next slide. But for independents, the picture, as I mentioned up front, is different. And so we'll get to $100 billion, as we said, by 2030, but 90% of that growth is actually going to bypass independents. You can see on the chart here, 90% of incremental growth will go to Amazon and Walmart. And as we sit here at NGA today, the purpose of NGA and the purpose of this conference is to support independents. And so with numbers like that, we have some work to do, and we have some things to do together to be successful. And I think what you'll find from our conversation is that term together will come over and over and over because by no means do we have the scale to compete with Amazon and Walmart or the tech. But if we don't come together and come up with a viable solution, we'll continue to lose the incremental growth. And what that means is the bigger players will only get bigger and bring in dollars from a retail media standpoint to support their business. Next slide, please. Parag Shah on our panel today, one of his partners in Think Blue, is also the CPG Guys co-host. And last week we were at FMI, and both Parag and Sri were talking about retail media, and Sri had this comment, and he actually said we could quote him, so I don't know that he knew I would quote him so quickly, nor that I would put his face up on the slide as we do it. But if you think about it, obviously Amazon is a big player in the marketplace, but as he said, right, Amazon does not deserve 76% of all retail media. Obviously there's some advantages there, some growth that they've driven, but I love this quote, and we'll continue to promote Sri and all this good stuff. Next page, please. But if you think about it, and we can go to the next slide too, what that means is that growth of those dollars and those investments, and not just the dollars, but what those dollars mean in terms of helping drive sales, right? We don't want to think about like the margin, we're going to think about retail media for attracting eyeballs to our stores, creating trips and transactions to our stores. That's the most important thing versus margin or things that we're taking to the bank. We have an audience here that is super, super important and super valuable to manufacturers. And so it's not that they say, hey, you know what, I only want to do Amazon and Walmart. It's the fact that we're not making our audience accessible through retail media. And so we'll have a good conversation about this as well. So if you think about it, there's a lot of barriers that have happened, and we'll address some of those in the panel. Next slide, please. And really, as we talk about the barriers, you can see a lot of them here, right? National CPG brands, media agencies, et cetera, want access to that audience that we just showed, but we've created barriers. So we're fragmented as an independent grocery industry. We have, in some cases, we don't have the right data. In some cases, we don't have the right technology. We make it clunky. And if we don't fix these things together, again, that work together, what we'll have is 89% of that growth continuing to grow to the big players. And in fact, I would posit that we'll probably have 95% or more of that investment going to those big players and bypassing us. And what that means is we're losing out on reaching and connecting with shoppers. Next page. And so one of the things also we see is lot of wholesalers, retailers have stood up retail media networks. But what we're seeing, if you look on the far right, the e-commerce brand marketing dollars, that's where the dollars sit at most of the brands. And so we're tapping into arguably the 11% of sales. So again, we're making it difficult. And if you're difficult to do business with, guess what? People don't want to do business with you. Next slide. So with that, quick sort of walkway through the situation. And with that, I'd like to invite our panelists up. So Rima from Coca-Cola, Nicole from Nielsen IQ, Parag from Think Blue, and unfortunately Riz could not join us today given the weather and everything else going on. But I know he's here in spirit, and as such, we'll try not to ask him too many questions. And Apollo, I'm not sure why it's like super dark over here. And, you know, I think actually when we set this up, we said, hey, we want to have an honest dialogue. You know, we don't have vendors up here selling. Nobody is up here saying we have the solution for independent grocery. I'm not standing up here saying, you know, buy now, whatever we're doing. So this is really set up as an honest conversation. And I think maybe NGA took that to the extreme and set up witness protection here. So that said, if we could start off, introductions, Rima, your background, where you sit in the ecosystem, and then we'll go into the questions.
Hi everyone, can you hear me okay? Rima Saha, part of what we call the Connected Commerce team at the Coca-Cola Company, where our team sits is really at the cross-section of media and driving transactions and helping our retailers achieve that, making sure the consumer is at the heart of every journey and experience, and making sure that we are able to track that from top to bottom. So been at the company for 5 years and been in the media world for a lot longer, but excited to have this conversation.
Great to meet you. Hi everyone. Feels like my mic is up a bit higher. I'm Nicole Kalita Davis. I lead retail and agency relationships for Nielsen IQ. And my job is all about working with our partners to uncover insights, stay ahead of industry trends, and ensure that every retail partner in this room is getting maximum value out of the investment that we are privileged to have them make with us. So I'm excited to be here as well.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Michael, for having us.
Now they can't be as honest.
Thank you for having us. It's great to share the podium with both of you ladies. But a little bit about myself, Parag Shah. I am a partner at Think Blue Consulting. But my background for almost a quarter century is in retail. I was a merchant at Wakefern, and then I went on to work for Giant Company, which is a banner at Ahold USA. I was doing center store merchandising and digital transformation. And now, Think Blue works at the intersection of data, technology, AI, and retail media, and helping our partners with growth, loyalty.
Awesome. Ryan, can you flip the slide? So we'll get right to it, right? We said no holds barred, no punches back. So let's do a reality check. So why hasn't spend scaled? So let's go with the brand first, right? So why hasn't independent grocery captured its fair share of retail media?
So when we say retail media, a very important part of that is media. Coming from a media background, there's a few brilliant basics, as we like to call it at the Coca-Cola Company, that need to happen that enables trust and thus increased investment over time in retail media. So some of those things I think that we're still struggling with from an independent perspective, one of which is measurement. I think a lot of us know impression level measurement, but what we're really looking for and looking at some of the top retail media networks is they're going way, way, way beyond that and looking at transactions, spend, really connecting every single dollar invested into an ROI. Impressions, clicks, and media metrics and media verification is a part of that, but ultimately all of that tracks to actual real business results and an ROI that helps drive that. So that is the fundamental reason of why we invest in retail media, is so that we can help invest dollars to make that connection with consumers with our brands. So if that piece and trust and that verification piece is met and understood at a media level and the results that it drives, then that's really what the best players do really well.
Yeah, I'll add two perspectives to this. So one, I think there's just an inherent operational risk from a CPG lens in executing with an independent retailer. It's a bespoke setup every time across groupings of regionals and super regionals versus one spend that can kind of power through the industry and provide more measurable value. I think what Rima's saying around measurement is a huge piece of the equation as well. But the other thing I'd add is maybe a little bit more qualitative, but this idea of managing audiences is very different from a regional and super regional retailer lens. The independent retailer, I'll say, a broad brushstroke, isn't managing audiences day to day. So this is a different way for us to talk. We build on our expertise as the hometown, local, know our consumer, know our audience. This is a different way of thinking about your audience, and being able to scale that audience is a big part of where I think there's opportunity in the independent space.
Just given your background with retail and now being able to see across the ecosystem, why do you think independents struggle to scale?
No, I agree with Rima. I agree with both Nicole and Rima and what their perspectives are. And to further build on that, I would say there are two things. One is capability and the other is intent. Right? So we get stuck at capabilities first on the technology side, implementation side, how difficult it is, and how costly it is, right? But you need to understand the intent when it comes to retail media. When you think of a store as you are operating a physical location, one of the metrics you manage is footfall, right? Traffic. But how do you translate that in the world of digital environment? Traffic is audience, to Nicole's point. But if you are not talking to your audience coming on your e-commerce channel, whether it's direct or third party, you're missing a huge opportunity. You don't miss that opportunity when it comes to the store, right? Your end caps, your displays, your shippers, all that stuff that goes onto the retail floor, because that's engagement. Retail media is also engagement, but from a digital perspective to where your customers are shopping. And once you have that intent and you work backwards to capabilities, then you can create the scaling opportunity for you and then work with brands like Coke in terms of saying, hey, here's my shopper, here's what they're shopping, here's the context, here's the opportunity, and then you can deploy the dollars. And with measurement capabilities, if you're getting incrementality both for you and the brand, there will be more money that will flow. Right? So it comes down to capability.
So you mentioned intent. Rima, I'll put you on the spot, and I will not put your face up on the next presentation with this quote. You mentioned intent, Parag. So from a Coke standpoint, it's not, well, it's not a question of not wanting that audience or not wanting the desire, correct? It's more of the capabilities not being stood up. Is that fair?
Absolutely. I think one of the biggest challenges we have in working with smaller retailers is the fragmentation. I think you touched upon it, Michael, in your presentation, where when we are looking at where our first dollar should it go to one company that could help us reach, let's say, 50% of our audience, or does it go through 10 companies that potentially could reach more or at that level? So when we look for efficiencies and look at our best dollars spent, that fragmentation definitely plays a big part in efficiency overall in our design to spend.
Yeah, I'll just build on what Nina said, right? It also comes down to your ability to drive audience into your digital ecosystem, right? If you're deliberate about it and you're not kind of creating an inertia that e-commerce is bad, and understanding what that audience means, that will help you unlock more dollars. But when you look at it from a P&L perspective, retail media can help you offset the cost of operating e-commerce. That's a huge opportunity of P&L. Don't treat it as advertising within your P&L. treated as an activity that's driven on merchandising that offsets the cost of operations of e-commerce, and that allows you to gain more loyalty with your shoppers.
I think the issue or the piece we get balled up in is thinking about retail media as dollars into the ecosystem versus the dollars into the ecosystem that can drive trips and transactions and bigger dollars overall. So I care about baskets, I don't necessarily care about media dollars.
I could add one thing on that too, is right now we look at retail media investment as a lever to drive transactions. When it goes well, or when we are able to, again, have an audience, think about that intent mindset and be able to quantify that value of the shopper, we grow from just a transactional retail media opportunity to a joint business growth opportunity. When you understand your audience and can quantify, or we can talk about how our brand helps you and your retailer is so important to us, and we can quantify that in the data and the measurement, that evolves a conversation from just media investment or transactional investment to larger business growth for both of us and a larger partnership with that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And I think that there's an element here of talking about the importance of retail media. And I know we're going to build to this, but I think there's a bigger element of capturing your fair share of spend in the marketplace. That can be via retail media, but it can also be via metrics and programs that work for you and how you need to show up for your consumer. There's one of my peers has a phrase that he says, are you aisles away or are you miles away from your consumer? And that's very, very relevant when you think about the independent community and the communities that we serve. Being aisles away might look different when you're talking about traditional retail media. For many of you in the room, that's okay, and it's important to know that nuance and to focus your strategy on capturing your fair share of the dollars that are in the ecosystem, whether it's going through retail media or through screens in store and traditional merchandising programs. You still have to show the value. You still have to be able to prove a consistent ROI, but super critical that you're telling a story that meets your consumers' needs and your ability to execute as well.
All right, can we flip to the next slide? So let's talk a little bit about what brands want to get you to buy. Let's move the conversation, Rima, to what does buyable retail media really look like internally?
We have a four-pronged approach to how we evaluate our retail media networks. We call them our lovely 4x4s. And underpinning all of this is scale, so I want to make sure it's not a 4x4, it is underpinning this entire thing. So number one is media performance. I talked a little bit about, we talked about ROI, we talked about transactions, sales, basket sizes, etc. So how is our media driving actual sales and transactions? That's number one. Media verification. I'm going to go off in the media world for a bit. We're talking about viewability, we're talking about fraud, we're talking about just making sure that if we pay $1 for our brand to be on your website, people are actually seeing it. That's essentially what media verification is. It involves complicated things like third-party tags, I'm not going to get into that. The third thing we look at is data capability. This is where we, again, I mentioned audiences. We look at purchasers within the last 16 weeks, 26 weeks, 52 weeks. We look at the opportunity to go beyond just past purchasers and look at how frequently they shop with you, how many trips are they taking in the store, are we in that basket when they're making that trip? So that all is underpinned by the data capability and how far into those audiences and those behaviors we can go to understand how we can help shift behavior at the end of the day. And then the last piece is the buying model. This is something super critical and has been a change for us over the past, I would say, past 5 years to last year and moving forward. We have very dedicated resources, brands typically do, on the agency side, and with media experts really helping drive and being a little bit more hands-on in the management of our retail media networks than we have in the past 5 to 10 years. Where before it was handing over the control to retailers, brands want a little bit more control on how that is spent. So when we look at self-serve options like Amazon, Walmart, Kroger, they all have evolved their marketplace into a self-service approach where brands can then go in and have more control over what audiences we buy, what brands we support, shift dollars between brands if we're in a portfolio. So that self-service model is definitely the path to the future. So those are our 4 metrics that we really look at, and underpinning that is all, of course, scale, so that we can make sure we are able to reach efficiencies and targeting our audiences and help driving the business at the end of the day.
So Nicole, Nielsen IQ obviously is probably first and foremost for measurement. And Rima talked a lot about different measurements that they need. So what are some of the non-negotiables for scaled investment that you're seeing?
Yeah, that's an important question. I think the first one is predictability. You have to be able to deliver on what you say you're going to deliver on from a reporting standpoint. So there are consistent gaps in what many retailers outside of some of the big scalable retailers can actually provide from a reporting standpoint. So making sure that you've got the right audiences and the right tags and the right consistent reporting to share results is a non-negotiable. I think the second one, we're talking about measurement, so I'll say measurability, but it's key metrics that are consistent in the industry. So how do you think about the measuring of incrementality and what that delivers for your business? And how do you think about getting that in a closed loop arena so you really know what consumers are exposed to, how they're buying, and what you're delivering back to the CPGs? And then the final one is, in our ecosystem, part of what makes us so special is our uniqueness in the marketplace. Part of what's critical to reporting and measurement is the comparability across the ecosystem. You have to be able to say that $1 spent in your door is equal to or greater than $1 spent somewhere else to make sure that you're getting that fair share of the market.
Yeah, I'll just build on what Nicole and Rima said. It's about incrementality. Right? At the end of the day, as Michael showed on one of the slides earlier, where is the money coming from, right? It's coming from brand marketing. So brands used to advertise on linear TV, which is your syndicated channels and your radio networks, right? As those channels' viewability went down, the money started shifting to where the audience is present, which is your ecosystem, right? And if your audience is present there, the brands want to reach them, but they want to invest based on the incrementality that's going to be driven out of it. So if you're selling, 100 bottles of 2-liter Coke, and by adding media investments, were you able to sell 10 more bottles? So that 10 is more important in this than the 100, right? Because were you able to attract new customers, new audiences to be able to drive that?
That makes sense. So it's fair then to say that unclear results cause dollars to move elsewhere. Some more questions here, but I know we have people in the audience who may be curious about specific things to ask our esteemed panelists. Any questions? I can keep going all day, so don't feel like you need to. James? Yeah.
I've been trying to cover this issue of how small retailers will capture a fair share of these spend for a while. There were masses in this town. The brands are mainly worried about using distribution power. They are able to distribute their fees spend across a really smaller town. Does that come up as a conversation?
I heard that question. Right. Are we worried that distribution will happen?
Well, I'm worried if you lose.
So if investment doesn't come to retailers, will there be retaliation in terms of distribution at physical source?
I think there's absolutely concern, but I think the way we look at it, again, is how can we grow the business together? That's the fundamental reason why we ask our partners for the 4x4 that I just walked through a little bit, and why we challenge and work with our partners to get to that level, so that one, the thought isn't that we don't want to invest. We want to make sure we invest. We just want to make sure we are able to quantify and show the value of that investment. And that is, of course, underpinned by the distribution and the commercial terms that we work together with. So it's not a question of, I want to reframe that thought of, if we don't spend, are there commercial implications? I want to reframe that thought of, how do we help better enable digital transformation for your organizations, when we know that retail media proves to be one of the indicators in digital transformation overall.
And I hear that consistently across our partners in the CPG space as well. The fear isn't partnering. The fear is partnering without return on investment. The fear is a pay-to-play scenario where dollars are sort of going into a funnel with unclear results or unclear path to the consumer's actual purchase.
I'm going to take a little different approach. I've been a retailer for a long time, right? And what I would say is that please don't use that tool only in your toolbox, right? To kind of tie fear tactics on distribution if you didn't get the dollars. So first understand the issue, right? I don't think so. The brands I've talked to, and hundreds of them in the last couple of years, they don't want to spend. The question is, what are they getting for that spend, and how does that tie into the growth piece of your collective businesses, right? If you have the capability and you have intent to grow, I think the dollars will flow. But when you try to force an outcome, when you don't have results, it's going to be a short-lived expectation, and you will, at the end of the day, lose shopper loyalty, which is something none of us in this room want to do.
I'll just add one more thing. We've been in scenarios, or we've been in partnerships where some investment levels were recommended that were maybe higher than what my team would have recommended. It's not to say we didn't move forward, it's how do we then make this work in a world in which we still need to hold retailers accountable for that measurement piece, while still, of course, evolving the business. So when we look at investment and fair share, we want to spend that fair share. It's not that we don't want to spend that fair share, it's just justifying that. When we're then asked, could this have gone to TV? Could this have gone to a Facebook or a Meta? We want to invest in the retail media network. We just need to make sure the capability and the story of that value of that investment is being told correctly.
All right, can you advance 2 slides? Let's talk about then, for our last bit, what has to change? Because what we've heard from the panelists is there are barriers, intentional or unintentional, that have been set up from how independents have operated, how wholesalers have operated. So where are we perhaps unintentionally undermining the opportunity as independents? Oh, you have a smile on your face, like you're ready to answer this question.
Who wants to tackle this one? I think...
and maybe there's some intentional undermining too, but let's just say...
Yeah, so I think the first thing we have to recognize is that the consumer's path to purchase has changed. It is so dramatically different than it was, even 12 months ago. But think 5, 10 years ago, how consumers were engaging with brands and retailers versus how they engage with them now. So I think when you ask the question, what has to change, there has to be a recognition amongst the NGA constituents that the consumer's path to purchase is different. It will never go back to the way that it was before. Consumers are in the driver's seat, and if you're not meeting those consumers in the moments that they're looking for you to meet them, you'll miss the basket. And if you miss the basket, you might permanently miss the trip ongoing. It's just the stakes are so much higher when it comes to how consumers are engaging with brands. So to me, what has to be true is this consumer first lens that Rima talked about, this joint value creation between brands and retailers, but in service of the consumer that actually ends up then getting you that extra item in the basket, that extra trip every week.
And I know there are a lot of service providers in the room who are helping independents as well, trying to scale these capabilities up. And what I'll call is that, you don't have to have just e-commerce capabilities. You also have to look at in-store media capabilities, because that's the next frontier that continues to grow in the digital engagement with the customer, right? And when you create those plans between the retailer, the service provider, and the CPG brands collectively together, and kind of highlight and prioritize what's important to each of the parties and what's the outcome that you desire, you end up creating value for all the players. It's not only about getting your fair share money from the checkbook of the brands, right? Yes, that's important. You want to get it because you're serving on behalf of them to the community. But at the end of the day, if the dollar works in support of delivering growth from a consumer perspective, the money will eventually flow.
So, speaking of money flowing, I think the only one up on the stage that has dollars to invest is you, Rima. So, if rebuilt from scratch, if you were to be able to wave your magic wand and say independence are X, what capabilities, what would be needed for you to take out that checkbook?
I think if I could step back in time and forward at the same time, one thing I would talk about is digital shelf transformation. How that, I think Parag mentioned in the earlier presentation about how that is changing in the AI world. However, that is the root of how brands show up on your platforms with your consumers. That, I can't emphasize the power of that enough, and making it easy for brands to have whether it's more control, have it more templatized, have it in whatever way that we can work with you to make it easier to update real time. That is, I think, number one, if I could build something from scratch all over, is make it easier for brands to integrate and own that digital shelf, especially as we look to how that's changing. Coca-Cola has had a saying, it's within arm's reach of desire. That shopping behavior that has changed, we are now changing to within clicks reach of desire. Arm and clicks reach of desire. So knowing and recognizing that consumer behavior change and that shopping experience has fundamentally shifted over the past 10 years, past 50 years, that recognition and the reactionary elements and the digital capabilities that you guys are building in response to that is absolutely key. And then the last piece, we've touched on fragmentation, but switching it into a positive, how can we look at finding efficiencies and collaborating so that we can reach that scale? We know the Walmart, the Amazons are at a level that is just completely different, and they have a different consumer value proposition than what you offer. So how can we combine that differentiator, but bring that to scale so that brands can and will spend more money with you?
Wow, that was a setup for my last question, unknowingly. So what could, and I want to ask each of you this question, what could the role of shared infrastructure or consortium-style approach be for independence? Nicole?
I think scale is obviously the primary reason that a consortium type approach would make sense. But going back to some of the things we talked about earlier that have to be true in a world for this to work, it's comparability. So if you could start to offer an audience that is much larger in scale, that has a consistent way to execute, and that can deliver predictable results with the same metrics holding true across a broad ecosystem, I think that unlocks a significant opportunity for CPG brands to engage across the independent retailer network.
When you think about how many retail media networks are there are over 100, maybe over 200 now, right? And like Michael showed, like Amazon, Walmart are getting the lion's share of it, right? The challenge is when you go with that kind of fragmentation, it becomes extremely difficult for any brands to really engage in that space, right? Because the capabilities, the infrastructure, the amount of time, resources are just required to get things set up. It's difficult, right? A consortium-style approach makes complete sense, but it has to come up with some fundamentals, starting with how does the item even show up within that ecosystem. So I'll be provocative and say, hey, from a physical store perspective, you would not, let your planograms look shabby, right? You would not allow that to happen. So why would that be true in the digital ecosystem, right? What are the product display pages, right? That's an acronym, PDP, that's used. You've got to be right. That's step one. Even before engaging on the retail media dollar front, you've got to have your digital shelf accurate. You will see a sales lift just by getting that done. Simple, because customers will improve the findability of the product and your volume will go up. Second, once you really reframe your conversation that this is my audience and this is how I want to serve it, this is my intent based on the categories and the brands that you're negotiating with, that would be very powerful approach. And then the third is the measurability. And you and Ping are doing some work around that piece, around how measurability really shows up, but not just based on cost per clicks or the investment required, but through incrementality of that investments. And talking to several brands, right, at this conference at FMI Midwinter about a week ago, that's what the brands need, right? They are willing to invest, but we need to understand the incrementality that comes out of it. And if there is incrementality, the good news is it's growth for everybody. For the retailers, starting with you first, right? And then the brands.
I'll add, I think you guys both said everything that needed to be said. The one piece that I would just, again, +1 for is the first-party data management and licensing. There are traditional retail media networks that are able to, or that partner to leverage that. I would say over the past 6 months to a year, I would even say some of the bigger tech players like Meta have also started aggregating data in that way and working with retailers to ingest first-party data. So again, from a brand perspective, how can we leverage your first-party data? What are all the different avenues? Obviously within your site as well as offsite, because now in a world, offsite is playing more and more of a role with social commerce, with the internet, with mobile commerce even. How can we leverage your data so that we can tell a combined story with both your brand and ours?
Can I make one last point? And everyone brings up a very important point of data. It's going to be the differentiator in the future, right? And we just talked about the AI panel a few an hour ago, right? If your data is not in order, your discoverability online is going to be missing in a big way, right? And because typically the Google search engine used to be finding you based on your web pages. In the future, ChatGPT and Gemini are going to find out user interaction, context, and how people are talking about your brand as well as as a retailer, your brand, right? So that's going to be important. The only way you can feed that information is having the right data and the right digital shelf in place, right? So data is going to be an important driver. So I know there have been a lot of concerns talking to a lot of independents, not only this year, but even last year. But data is going to be your real advantage in the future, where there has been risk and concern so far, but change the mindset that how data can work for you, not against you, right? That's going to be a huge unlock as you look in the future.
So appreciate the conversation. Thanks to our panelists for their openness, honesty. Sorry that we got the witness protection stuff out of here. So one of the things that, as we came into this conversation, the fear that the panelists wouldn't be honest. The second one was, since NGA has 8 sessions at the same time, we thought we might get like 2 people in the room. So we appreciate you coming, and given that we are competing against 7 other groups, if we could thank the panelists and be really loud so they get jealous that they missed out on something. So thank you.